It was an ordinary Thursday evening in Manhattan, a city that never slept, yet Ethan Bradley felt as though his world was about to come to an end. The towering skyscrapers that marked the skyline of New York were bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun, but for Ethan, it felt like the darkness had already started creeping in. As the CEO of Bradley Enterprises, one of the largest tech companies in the country, Ethan's days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and constant pressure. He had grown used to it, the long hours, the constant demands, and the ever-present need to stay ahead of the competition. But tonight something felt different. It wasn't just another business day, it was a moment that would change his life forever. Ethan had just returned to his luxury apartment in the heart of Manhattan. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped out into the lobby, glancing briefly at the framed paintings that decorated the walls. His apartment was on the top floor, the pinnacle of luxury, with a view that stretched all the way to the Statue of Liberty. It was the kind of place that most people only dreamed of: expensive furniture, sleek lines, and a sense of detachment from the world below. But tonight it felt empty. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee still lingering in the air from his earlier morning. His assistant, Claire, had left a stack of documents on his desk, but Ethan wasn't interested in work right now. He felt drained, physically and emotionally. He tossed his keys onto the side table and moved toward the kitchen, grabbing a glass of water. As he turned, he heard something. A soft sound like a muffled cry, coming from the hallway. Confused, Ethan walked towards the source of the sound. He thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him, the kind of exhaustion that led to strange hallucinations. But as he rounded the corner, his heart stopped. There, on the doorstep of his apartment, sat a small baby carrier. It was a simple, white carrier, the kind he had seen countless times in baby stores, but what caught his attention was the note attached to it. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he reached for the note. It was neatly folded, the handwriting clear and deliberate. The note read, "This is your child. Don't trust anyone, especially the ones who are closest to you. Call 911 immediately." Ethan felt a rush of confusion and disbelief flood his body. He looked down at the baby, who appeared to be no more than a few months old. The child's eyes were closed, peaceful, as if unaware of the chaos that was unfolding around them. Ethan had never seen this child before. He didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl, but something in his gut told him that this was no ordinary situation. The note felt too personal, too urgent. The words were like a punch to the stomach, making him question everything about his life. For a moment Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. What was going on? Who could have left this child at his door? The note had made it clear that there was a connection that Ethan couldn't understand. He didn't have any children. He wasn't married. His relationships were fleeting, casual affairs, with no one serious enough to leave him with a child. Yet here it was, a baby that was somehow tied to him, left in the care of the very person least prepared to raise a child. Ethan's fingers hovered over the phone, but he hesitated. Calling 911 seemed like the only logical choice, but at the same time he couldn't bring himself to do it. The note had warned him to call, yet there was a voice in his head that told him to wait. What if this was a prank? What if this was some elaborate scheme designed to throw him off course, to distract him from something bigger? He had no enemies, at least none that he knew of, but the message was clear: don't trust anyone. The thought of calling the authorities only deepened his sense of unease. Who would believe him if he said a baby had been left on his doorstep with a cryptic note? And why had they chosen him? What was the real story behind this child? His mind spun with possibilities, each one more outlandish than the last. Was this some sort of test, or worse, a threat? But no matter how much he tried to rationalize the situation, the baby remained there, still, quiet, and entirely dependent on him. Ethan swallowed hard and forced himself to take action. With a steadying breath, he reached for his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Ethan's voice trembled as he spoke. I found a baby on my doorstep. There's a note with it and it says the child is mine. The operator's tone was calm, but there was an edge of urgency in her voice as she asked for his address. Ethan gave it to her, and she assured him that officers would be dispatched immediately. He hung up the phone, his body still in a state of shock, and turned back to the baby. It felt like time had stopped. The sound of the city outside his windows, the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, seemed distant now, like it was happening on another planet. As he sat down on the floor beside the baby, Ethan couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. He had always prided himself on his ability to solve problems, to stay in control, but this was something entirely different. There were no answers here, only questions. And the only thing he knew for certain was that his life would never be the same again. He glanced at the baby one last time before hearing the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. The authorities were on their way, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had just taken an unimaginable turn. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The night seemed to stretch on forever for Ethan Bradley. He sat in his immaculate apartment, the sounds of the city's nightlife filtering through the windows, but it felt as though the world outside had ceased to exist. The baby, now wrapped in a warm blanket, slept peacefully on the coffee table, an innocent reminder of the chaos that had entered his life in the most unexpected way. The officers had arrived not long after his 911 call, their presence official and reassuring, but the questions they asked only deepened the mystery. Detective Maria Gonzalez had been the first to speak when she entered his apartment. Tall, composed, and with a no-nonsense attitude, she had immediately taken charge of the situation. The baby was checked for any signs of harm, and a preliminary investigation began, but it was clear from the start that this wasn't just an ordinary case. The cryptic note, the urgency in its words, and the claim that this child was his, it all felt too surreal to comprehend. "Do you recognize this child, Mr. Bradley?" Detective Gonzalez had asked, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that suggested she was trying to read him like a book. Ethan had shaken his head, disbelief clouding his thoughts. "No, I don't. I've never seen this baby before. And I certainly didn't have any. I didn't know anything about this child." The detective hadn't said much after that. Instead, she'd looked at the baby, and then at Ethan, as if weighing the situation in her mind. "We'll take the child to the hospital for a checkup. It's standard procedure. But I'm going to need you to come down to the station with us. We need to get your statement and figure out where this baby came from." Ethan had agreed, still unsure what was happening. What could he say? He hadn't a clue about this child's origin, and the note only seemed to complicate things further. It wasn't just the words that disturbed him, it was the implication that someone knew him, or at least knew about him, in a way that wasn't just coincidental. The warning in the note felt too precise, too deliberate to be a random act. He had reluctantly followed the officers to the precinct, where the interrogation room felt colder than it should have been. As they waited for the paperwork to be processed, Ethan's mind raced. The life he had worked so hard to build, the high-rise office, the prestigious company, the reputation he had carefully crafted, was beginning to crumble. It wasn't just the child, but the note's warning that sent a chill down his spine. "Don't trust anyone," it had said. The very words seemed to haunt him as he sat across from Detective Gonzalez, trying to make sense of it all. Maria had given him a look, one that suggested she wasn't convinced by his story. "Tell me again, Mr. Bradley, do you have any enemies? Anyone who might have a reason to target you?" The question took him by surprise. Ethan had always thought of himself as a businessman, focused solely on expanding his company. Sure, there were competitors, but none that had ever posed a real threat to him, at least not in a personal way. The cutthroat world of tech wasn't kind, but he had always believed that he kept his dealings above board. "No, I don't think so," he had replied, his voice betraying his unease. "I mean, there's always the occasional corporate rivalry, but no one who would go to these lengths. This is something else. This feels personal." The detective had pressed on, her questions more pointed now. "Is there anyone in your life who might know something about this? A woman, perhaps? Someone who might have had a relationship with you?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat at the mention of a woman. His mind flickered to an old memory, one he had buried deep within the recesses of his mind. Her name was Lauren. They had met years ago, back when he was still figuring out what he wanted from life. Lauren had been different from the others, smart, independent, and charming in a way that drew him in. Their relationship had been brief, intense, but it ended just as quickly as it had started. He had never heard from her again, not until this moment. The thought of her reappeared, unbidden and unsettling. I did have a relationship with someone a while ago," Ethan said slowly, trying to piece together the fragments of his past. "Her name was Lauren. We were close for a while, but it ended. There was no contact after that. I haven't seen or heard from her in years." Detective Gonzalez's eyes narrowed. "Lauren, you say? Do you know where she is now? Or where she might be?" Ethan shook his head, the uncertainty clouding his thoughts. "No, she just disappeared. I tried reaching out a few times after, but nothing." There was a long pause before the detective spoke again. "I think it's time we find Lauren," she said, her tone resolute. "If this baby is yours and if someone's out to get you, then we need to talk to her." She may know something we don't. Ethan was left in a daze as the detective made her call. His mind raced with 1,000 possibilities, all of them dangerous. What if this was Lauren's child? What if the baby wasn't just a coincidence? What if someone had used Lauren to get to him, to tear down everything he had built? The next few hours dragged on. The police had placed a trace on Lauren's name, trying to find any leads that might point them in her direction. Ethan couldn't sit still, his thoughts spinning. The more he thought about Lauren, the more it became clear that her disappearance wasn't just a matter of fate. She had left for a reason. But what reason could possibly tie her to this child, to him? Finally, at around midnight, a breakthrough came. Detective Gonzalez returned with new information. "We found Lauren," she said. "She's living in Brooklyn under a different name. We're sending someone to speak with her right now." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The answers he had been searching for were within reach. He stood up from his seat, his mind whirling with anticipation and dread. What would Lauren say? And what did this all mean for him? Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The next morning, Ethan could hardly sit still. The conversation with Detective Gonzalez had left him feeling anxious and unsettled. He couldn't focus on the paperwork that awaited him at his office, nor could he shake the sense of impending dread that followed him throughout the day. Every time his phone rang, his stomach tightened, expecting to hear news about Lauren. It had been hours since the detective had left, and though they had promised to find her, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he would discover when they did. He had always been the kind of person who relied on logic, who approached problems with a level head. But this situation felt like nothing he had ever encountered before. A baby, his baby, had appeared on his doorstep, accompanied by a cryptic note, and now Lauren, a woman he hadn't seen in years, was suddenly back in the picture. The more Ethan thought about it, the more he realized how little he knew about her. Their relationship had been brief and intense, but it had ended just as quickly. They had both moved on, or at least he thought they had. She had never reached out to him again, and he had never bothered to track her down. Now, everything was connected in a way he didn't fully understand. Around noon, Ethan's phone buzzed. It was Detective Gonzalez. His heart raced as he answered. "Mr. Bradley?" The detective's voice was calm but urgent. "We've located Lauren. She's in a small apartment in Brooklyn. She's refusing to speak with us, but we believe she's hiding something." Ethan's mind raced. "Hiding something? What do you mean?" "There's something off about her story," the detective replied. "She's not being entirely forthcoming. But we have reason to believe she's involved in whatever this is. I need you to come down here, Mr. Bradley. We need your help." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had been hoping for some clarity, some straightforward explanation. But now it seemed that things were only getting more complicated. His fingers tightened around the phone as he agreed to meet the detective in Brooklyn. "I'll be there as soon as I can." The drive to Brooklyn felt longer than it should have. The streets were crowded with the usual hustle and bustle of the city, but for Ethan, it was as if the world had slowed to a crawl. Every turn, every stoplight felt like an eternity. The baby, still in his thoughts, seemed like a distant memory now. The real issue was Lauren. What had she been hiding all these years? And why had she left so abruptly? The questions piled up with no easy answers. When he arrived at the small, run-down building in Brooklyn, Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't the kind of place he was used to seeing. He was accustomed to luxury, to clean lines and modern amenities. This building was old, the brick facade chipped and weathered by time. It wasn't where he had imagined finding Lauren, not in his wildest dreams. Detective Gonzalez was waiting outside the building, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the street. "Mr. Bradley," she said as soon as he stepped out of the car. "Follow me." They walked through the narrow hallways of the building, the floors creaking beneath their feet. Ethan's mind raced, but he kept his focus on the task at hand. As they reached the apartment, Detective Gonzalez knocked twice, the sound echoing through the hall. There was a pause before the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her late 20s. She looked tired, worn down by something, though her eyes seemed to flicker with recognition as they landed on Ethan. "Lauren?" Ethan's voice was low, uncertain. He hadn't seen her in years, and the years had clearly changed her. She no longer had the same vibrant spark that had once drawn him to her. Now there was a coldness in her eyes that made him uneasy. "Ethan?" she replied, her voice hesitant. "What are you doing here?" The detective stepped forward, showing her badge. "We need to speak with you about the child that was left at Mr. Bradley's apartment last night." Lauren's face paled at the mention of the baby. She glanced nervously at the floor, then back at Ethan, her expression shifting from defensive to something softer, almost regretful. I didn't, she started, but then stopped herself as if unsure how to continue. I didn't want this. I didn't want to involve you. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Lauren, what is going on? What's with the baby? Why was it left at my door? And why didn't you tell me about it? Lauren took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of something heavy had finally caught up to her. I never meant for it to come to this, she said, her voice trembling. I wanted to protect you from all of this. I didn't want you to get involved. Get involved with what? Ethan asked, his frustration growing. Lauren, I need answers. I can't do this on my own. Lauren's gaze flickered to Detective Gonzalez, who remained silent, watching them closely. Then she finally spoke. Ethan, the baby, it's yours, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But there's more to the story. You need to understand this wasn't just some mistake. This is part of something much bigger. Ethan felt a chill run through him as the words sank in. The baby was his. The truth had finally been revealed, but the shock of it left him momentarily speechless. He looked at Lauren, trying to process the weight of what she had just said. What do you mean, part of something bigger? Ethan's voice cracked slightly as he asked the question, the realization of fatherhood setting in like a tidal wave. Lauren's eyes filled with tears and she turned away for a moment, collecting herself before speaking again. There's someone out there who's been watching us. They knew about the baby and they've been threatening me. I didn't know what to do, so I thought I could handle it on my own. But it's gone too far now. They've made it clear that you're in danger too, Ethan. Ethan stood frozen in place, his heart racing. Danger? What did that mean? Who would go to such lengths to target him and his unborn child? Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan stood there in shock, processing Lauren's words, but nothing seemed to make sense. She had just revealed that the baby was his, and yet the situation felt more complicated than ever. He barely knew what to believe anymore. Was she lying? Or was she telling the truth? His mind raced with questions, but the one thing that seemed clear was that he couldn't just walk away. There was too much at stake now, and whatever danger Lauren had hinted at was real. The detective, sensing the tension in the room, cleared her throat. Mr. Bradley, I think we need to move past the shock for a moment. We need answers, and you need to know exactly what you're dealing with here. Ethan nodded, still reeling from the bombshell Lauren had dropped on him. What do you mean by they're threatening me, Lauren? He could hardly bring himself to ask, but he needed to know. Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around the small, dimly lit apartment. She seemed afraid to speak, but at the same time, there was a sense of urgency in her voice when she finally responded. There's a man, Ethan. He's been following me for months now. He knows about the baby, and he made it clear that if I didn't follow his instructions, something would happen to both of us. Her voice cracked as she spoke, and Ethan could see the pain in her eyes. Who is he? Ethan demanded, his frustration growing. What does he want with us? Lauren took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped away a stray tear. His name is Richard Vaughn. He's involved in some illegal business. He's dangerous. I didn't know how to get away from him. I thought if I just kept my head down and stayed out of his way I could protect myself, but... She paused, the weight of her words sinking in. I should have told you sooner, Ethan. I didn't want you to get involved, but now. I don't know what else to do. Ethan's mind was spinning. Richard Vaughn. The name didn't mean anything to him, but the fear in Lauren's eyes told him all he needed to know. Whoever this man was, he was someone to be feared. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to steady his thoughts. What does he want from us? What did he tell you to do? Lauren's voice dropped to a whisper. He said I needed to make sure the baby was taken care of, that no one could know the truth. He wanted me to keep quiet and stay out of sight. He said if I didn't, he would come after me, and you. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea who this Richard Vaughn was, but the fact that he had been using Lauren to manipulate and control her, and now was threatening him and his child, was too much to ignore. This has gone too far, Ethan muttered, his voice low and filled with determination. We need to get out of here. You're not staying here any longer, Lauren? Lauren shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. No, Ethan. You don't understand. If I leave, if I go to the police again, he'll find us. He'll hurt us. I've tried everything I could think of, but he always seems to be one step ahead. He has people watching me. Watching you. The air in the apartment felt thick with tension. Ethan's mind raced. He wasn't going to sit back and let some criminal tear apart his life. There was too much at risk. He thought about the baby again, the little girl he barely knew but was now a part of his life in an instant. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt her, and certainly not Lauren, no matter how complicated their past had been. "Okay," he said, his voice steadying. "We're going to get out of here. We're going to go to the police and we're going to make sure this guy can't hurt anyone again. But we're going to do it my way." Detective Gonzalez, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "We'll need to act fast. We've already contacted our department, and they've put out an alert about Vaughn. But the longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes. We need to get Lauren into protective custody as soon as possible." Ethan turned to Lauren. "Are you willing to do that? To leave everything behind and let us protect you?" Lauren hesitated for a moment, her eyes clouded with doubt. "I don't know. I'm scared, Ethan. I've been trying to protect myself, trying to keep things quiet. But now that you're involved, I don't want to bring more trouble to you. You don't deserve this." Ethan took a step closer to her, his expression softening. "I don't care about the trouble, Lauren. I care about you and that little girl. We'll figure this out together. You're not alone anymore." Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment Ethan thought she might collapse. But then she nodded, her resolve strengthening. "Okay, I'll go with you. I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe." Detective Gonzalez gave a small nod of approval, pulling out her phone to make the necessary arrangements. "We'll get a team in place. But Mr. Bradley, I need to warn you, this is not going to be easy. Vaughn has connections and he's not someone to take lightly. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't care what it takes. We're getting this over with." As the detective made the call, Ethan turned back to Lauren. "We'll figure this out. You don't have to be afraid anymore." The room was silent for a moment, save for the soft buzz of Detective Gonzalez's phone. Ethan's mind was consumed with thoughts of the baby, of Lauren, and of what lay ahead. Whoever this Richard Vaughn was, he was about to meet someone who wasn't going to back down. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The drive to the safe house was long, the city lights flickering past as Ethan and Lauren sat in the back of a black SUV. Detective Gonzalez was up front, her eyes scanning the road and her mind clearly miles ahead, calculating every step of the plan. The silence in the car was thick, almost suffocating as Ethan stared out the window, his thoughts consumed by the situation they were in. The baby, now sound asleep in the carrier next to Lauren, seemed to be the only source of peace in an otherwise chaotic world. Ethan couldn't help but glance at Lauren every few moments, trying to process everything she had said. Richard Vaughn. A name that meant nothing to him until now, and yet it felt like the key to everything. He couldn't understand why someone would go to such lengths to hurt people like this. Lauren had only been trying to protect herself and her child, and now it seemed that the world was against them. He turned to look at her again. She was staring down at the baby, her face a mask of both determination and fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered suddenly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "I didn't want to bring you into this mess. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. This wasn't supposed to happen." Ethan's chest tightened. He could hear the guilt in her voice, but he also knew that the burden she carried was not hers alone. "You're not the only one responsible, Lauren. I'm here because I want to help. We're going to fix this." She didn't respond immediately, but Ethan could feel the weight of her emotions hanging in the air between them. There was so much more to her than what he had originally thought. The strong, determined woman he'd met at the office a few months ago was now just a shadow of the person he saw before him. Behind her defiant exterior was someone who had been running for too long, too afraid to confront the dangers lurking in the shadows. As the car continued to cut through the darkened streets of the city, Ethan found his mind wandering back to the details Lauren had shared. Richard Vaughn. He was an enigma, a man who had somehow managed to keep his activities hidden for so long, a man whose connections were far-reaching enough to intimidate anyone who dared cross him. From what Lauren had said, Vaughn had eyes everywhere, and his reach seemed endless. Ethan's knuckles tightened around the armrest as the thought of that man and what he might do to them gnawed at him. The baby's soft cooing snapped Ethan back to the present. He looked down at the small child, her innocent face seemingly unaware of the dangers surrounding her. He wondered what kind of future she would have, given the turmoil that had been thrust upon her. Would she grow up in peace, or would she carry the weight of this nightmare with her for the rest of her life? Lauren seemed to sense his thoughts and looked up, meeting his gaze. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Ethan. I wasn't sure I could do this alone." He smiled, trying to ease her anxiety. "You're not alone anymore, Lauren. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." It was a simple promise, but in that moment, it felt like the most important thing he could offer. By the time the car pulled into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, the weight of the situation was heavy in Ethan's chest. The safe house was tucked away, hidden in plain sight. The house was small, unassuming, and inconspicuous, with a security system that was state-of-the-art. It was the perfect place to lay low until they could figure out their next move. Detective Gonzalez parked the car and turned around to face them. "This is it. We'll stay here until we have enough information on Vaughn to make a move." She looked directly at Lauren. "You'll be safe here, but you need to stay inside. Do not go outside unless you're with us. Vaughn has people watching and we don't want to take any chances." Lauren nodded, her face pale but her eyes filled with resolve. "I understand." Ethan helped Lauren out of the car, his hand brushing against hers. He could feel the tension in her entire body on edge. He understood why. Being on the run with a child to care for and someone like Richard Vaughn hunting her down would break anyone's spirit. But Lauren wasn't broken. She was stronger than she knew, and Ethan had to remind himself of that. As they walked into the house, the air seemed to shift. The walls, while sturdy and secure, felt like they were closing in on him. The thought of being cooped up in this house for an indefinite period of time felt almost claustrophobic. He couldn't stand the idea of just waiting for something to happen. He needed to act, needed to do something. But for now all they could do was wait. Inside, the house was as nondescript as the outside. A simple living room, a kitchen with just the basics, and a few bedrooms. Nothing extravagant, nothing out of place. But that's exactly what they needed right now. Ethan looked over at Lauren, who was already sitting on the couch, holding the baby close to her chest. Her eyes were focused on the child, and for a brief moment, Ethan could see the depth of love and devotion she had for the little girl. It was the same kind of love he felt for his own family, and he couldn't imagine how it must feel to be in her shoes, running for her life, knowing that her enemies could be watching her every move. He sat down next to her, not knowing what to say. The silence between them was heavy, but it was the kind of silence that needed to be filled with action, not words. "We'll figure this out," he said again, hoping the words would bring her some comfort. Lauren didn't answer, but Ethan could see the faintest trace of a smile tug at the corners of her lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. The sun had barely begun to rise the following morning when Ethan woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing on the nightstand. He squinted at the clock. It was still early, too early for anything significant. He glanced at Lauren, who was curled up on the couch with the baby still asleep in her arms. He hesitated for a moment before picking up the phone, his mind racing with the possibilities of who could be calling at this hour. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but the area code matched the one from the city where he had grown up. His heart skipped a beat as he answered the call. "Hello? Ethan, it's Detective Gonzalez," came the voice from the other end, calm but tinged with urgency. "I need you to listen carefully." Ethan's mind instantly sharpened. He motioned for Lauren to stay quiet, his gaze fixed on her as she stirred slightly. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension inside him. "I need you to meet me in person," Gonzalez said. "It's important. I can't explain everything over the phone, but I've uncovered something about Vaughn. Something that puts you both at risk." Ethan felt his stomach tighten at the mention of Vaughn. He knew that the investigation had been progressing, but hearing that something new had come to light made him anxious. "Where do you want to meet?" "I'll text you the address. It's a diner on the edge of town. Get there as quickly as you can." "Understood," Ethan replied, already standing up and dressing quickly. He glanced back at Lauren, who was still adjusting to the morning light. He walked over to her, keeping his voice low as he spoke. "Lauren, I have to go. It's about Vaughn. Detective Gonzalez has information for us." Lauren's eyes widened, her hands gripping the baby a little tighter. "You're going alone?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Ethan nodded, his face hardening. "I'll be fine. Just stay here and keep the baby safe. I'll be back soon." Lauren didn't say anything at first, but the look on her face told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't sure whether to trust that he would be okay or if she should come with him. But he couldn't risk putting her in danger, not when they were so close to finding answers. He left the safe house quietly, the early morning chill biting at his skin as he made his way to the car. The drive to the diner was tense, his mind spinning with questions about what the detective could have uncovered. What new information did she have on Vaughn? Was it enough to bring him down once and for all? The diner was located on the outskirts of town, tucked away in a corner where the roads met and traffic was sparse. As he parked the car and walked up to the entrance, he could see Gonzalez already sitting in a booth by the window, her face tense as she watched the parking lot. Ethan approached her cautiously, sliding into the seat across from her. "Any updates?" he asked, his voice low. Gonzalez wasted no time. She handed him a folder, its contents sealed shut. "This is what I've managed to dig up on Vaughn. It's not pretty and it's not something I can reveal to the public just yet. But I need you to understand something. Vaughn isn't just a businessman. He's much more dangerous than we thought. He's been laundering money for years, using legitimate businesses as fronts for illegal activities. And that's not all." Ethan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the papers inside. As he read through the documents, he felt his heart sink. Vaughn's criminal empire was far more expansive than they had initially suspected. The money he was funneling was tied to everything from drug trafficking to human smuggling. His grip on power was stronger than ever, and it was clear now that the man would stop at nothing to protect his empire. "Where does this leave us?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with frustration. "How do we take him down?" Gonzalez leaned forward, her gaze steady. "We can't do it alone. We need leverage. And that's where you come in." Ethan's confusion deepened. "Leverage? What do you mean?" Gonzalez hesitated before speaking again, her voice lowering as if she was about to reveal something he wasn't ready to hear. "You and Lauren. Vaughn has been watching her. He's been monitoring her every move for months, ever since she started working at that law firm. He knows who she is and he knows about the baby. That's why he sent those threats, and that's why he's been so determined to find her. He wants control over her, over everything she knows. And if we're going to get to him, we need to use that." Ethan's blood ran cold as the gravity of the situation hit him. "You're saying we use Lauren as bait?" Gonzalez shook her head. "No, that's not what I'm suggesting. But we do need to get close to Vaughn, and the only way to do that is through his connection to her. We've been tracking him, but he's too careful. We need something more concrete, something he can't ignore." Ethan stared at the detective for a moment, processing what she had said. The plan was risky, too risky, but it was the only option they had left. "What's the next step?" "We gather intel. We let Vaughn think we're closing in on him, but we have to be careful. We can't tip him off too soon. If he knows we're coming after him, he'll disappear before we can get to him." Ethan nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility settling over him. "I'll do whatever it takes. But we have to move fast." As they continued to talk through the details of the plan, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. Every step they took brought them closer to Vaughn, but it also brought them closer to danger. He had to be sure they were ready for what lay ahead. There was no turning back now. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan barely slept that night. The weight of what he had learned from Detective Gonzalez was too heavy, too real. He kept imagining the look on Lauren's face when he would have to explain that they were using her as bait in this dangerous game. She had already gone through so much. Was this really what it had come to? The next morning, as he sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, he tried to steady himself. Lauren was still asleep, her soft breathing filling the house with a calm that didn't match the storm he was about to walk into. The baby, sleeping soundly in her crib, seemed blissfully unaware of the chaos surrounding them. But that couldn't last forever. They were running out of time, and every day Vaughn grew bolder. Ethan knew the risk. It wasn't just his life that was at stake anymore. It was Lauren's, the baby's, and everyone they loved. He couldn't afford to be careless. He glanced at his phone. There was a message from Gonzalez. Nothing urgent, just a reminder to keep things under wraps. Ethan hated how tight-lipped everything had become. They had to operate in the shadows now. There was no room for mistakes. Ethan decided to head out early. He had a meeting at a business conference later in the day, but he knew that wasn't where he needed to focus his energy. He needed to think, to plan. He couldn't afford to be distracted. The thought of going back to his regular life and pretending everything was normal seemed impossible. He was trapped in this tangled web with no way out. As he drove into the city, the streets were bustling with activity, but to Ethan, everything seemed distant. People went about their routines, unaware of the looming danger that had taken over his life. He pulled up to the downtown parking lot, parking his car with mechanical precision. The building was tall and sleek, a symbol of his success. But today, as he stood in front of it, it felt hollow. Inside, his assistant, Sarah, greeted him with her usual warm smile, but there was something in her eyes that Ethan couldn't quite place. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, handing him a stack of papers. "Your 10 a.m. meeting is still on schedule. And here are the reports you requested." Ethan nodded but didn't take the papers. "Sarah, I need you to keep an eye on the office today. If anyone asks about me, tell them I'm tied up with some personal matters." She looked at him, confusion crossing her features. "Is everything okay?" Ethan hesitated. The truth was he didn't know what was happening anymore. "Everything's fine," he lied. "Just take care of things here." With a small nod, she left him to his thoughts. Ethan stood by the window looking out over the city. For the first time, the view seemed less like an achievement and more like a prison. He had everything he'd ever wanted: money, success, power, and yet none of it mattered now. All that mattered was ending this nightmare. After some time, Ethan decided to head back to the hotel where Lauren and the baby were staying. He needed to check on them, but he also needed to talk to Lauren about the next phase of the plan. Gonzalez had told him to prepare for the worst. There was a good chance Vaughn would retaliate soon. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The drive back to the hotel felt longer than usual, each minute stretching into eternity. His thoughts raced. What if Lauren didn't understand? What if she couldn't handle the idea of being involved in this dangerous game? He didn't know how much longer he could keep it from her, but he couldn't risk losing her trust. She had been through enough, and now he was asking her to put her life on the line. When he arrived, the sight of Lauren holding the baby in her arms, her face serene but tired, took the edge off his nerves, at least for a moment. The baby, still so innocent, seemed completely unaware of the danger that was closing in around them. Ethan felt his heart ache as he watched her. Lauren noticed him standing in the doorway and smiled weakly. "Hey," she said softly, "you're back earlier than I thought." Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, the meeting wrapped up faster than expected." Lauren looked down at the baby, her face softening. "I think she's teething," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "She's been fussy all morning." Ethan walked over and sat next to her on the bed, reaching out to gently stroke the baby's tiny hand. "She's tough. She'll get through it." Lauren shifted uncomfortably, her eyes searching his face. "You seem distant, Ethan. Is everything really okay? You've been acting strange lately." He froze, his throat tightening. He had been doing his best to keep things normal, but Lauren's perceptiveness was impossible to ignore. She could always tell when something was off. I just have a lot on my mind," he said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'll be fine. I promise." Lauren didn't look convinced. "I know you're trying to protect me, but we need to talk about this. Whatever it is, I'm not going to let you go through it alone." Ethan took a deep breath. This was the moment. He couldn't avoid it any longer. "Lauren, there's something I need to tell you. It's about Vaughn." Her eyes widened and she straightened up, her attention now fully on him. "Vaughn? What about him?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We've been investigating him. He's dangerous, Lauren. He's been behind a lot of criminal activities, money laundering, trafficking. And he's been watching you. He knows who you are. He knows about the baby." Lauren's face turned pale. "What do you mean he's been watching me? How?" Ethan's heart ached as he explained the situation, how Vaughn had been monitoring her every move since she started working at the law firm. He told her about the threats, the danger they were both in. And he told her about the plan to take Vaughn down, which involved using her as leverage. Lauren was silent for a long moment, processing what he had just said. "So, you're asking me to put myself in danger again?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, guilt washing over him. "I know it's a lot to ask. But we don't have a choice. This is the only way to stop him." Lauren's eyes softened, but there was a fire behind them. "Then let's do it. Let's stop him. Together." Ethan looked at her, relief flooding his chest. She understood. They were in this together. And for the first time in days, he allowed himself to believe that they might just make it out alive. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as the plan to confront Vaughn started taking shape. The days seemed to blend into one another as they prepared for the final confrontation, a game that felt increasingly dangerous with every passing hour. Despite Lauren's resolve, Ethan couldn't shake the anxiety that gnawed at him. The moment they decided to play Vaughn's game, everything had escalated beyond their control. They were no longer in charge of the situation, it was out of their hands. Lauren, despite her initial shock and fear, had become more determined with each conversation. She wasn't just a bystander anymore, she was an active participant in the fight. Her decision to take this path had been fueled by a combination of love for her child, a deep sense of justice, and a thirst to stop Vaughn before he could destroy more lives. Ethan admired her strength, but he also feared it would push her into the very heart of danger. On the morning of the planned operation, Ethan had trouble sleeping. He kept picturing Vaughn's face, the face of a man whose entire life seemed to be built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and corruption. The idea of confronting him, knowing the man was capable of anything, sent shivers down his spine. But there was no going back now. The plan was set in motion. He had to trust in the strategy they'd devised and, most importantly, trust Lauren. When he arrived at the safe house they'd rented out in downtown Los Angeles, Lauren was already there, sitting in front of the computer, going through some of the old files they'd managed to gather on Vaughn. She looked up as he entered, her face a mix of focus and concern. She didn't need to say anything. Ethan could see the tension in her eyes. The baby was napping in the other room, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked, trying to mask his own unease with a calm voice. Lauren leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms over her head. "I'm ready. We've been talking about this for weeks. I know what we have to do. Do you?" Ethan nodded, trying to find some comfort in her words. "I've thought about nothing else. We just need to stay one step ahead of him. We have to make him believe he's in control, but we can't let him see how much we know." There was a brief silence as both of them absorbed the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about exposing Vaughn, it was about bringing him to justice. The man had ruined lives, and Ethan knew that if they didn't stop him now, he would continue to wreak havoc. Lauren stood up and walked toward the small kitchenette, grabbing a cup of coffee. Her movements were slow, methodical, and it was obvious she was still processing the enormity of the situation. "You're sure this is the right thing to do? I mean, I'm not exactly used to this." Ethan met her gaze, his heart heavy with a mixture of admiration and guilt. "It's the only way. We can't live in fear forever. This ends tonight." Lauren nodded, taking a deep breath. "Then we do it. We end it." Ethan felt a pang of anxiety in his chest. This was the moment that would define everything. They had set the bait, and now it was time for Vaughn to take the bait. They had a meeting scheduled for that evening at a location he'd often frequented, an old, secluded restaurant in the outskirts of Los Angeles that Vaughn had used for discreet dealings in the past. They had chosen it because it was a familiar place, one that Vaughn would feel comfortable in, which would make him let his guard down. As the evening approached, both of them prepared in silence. Lauren checked over her phone, ensuring that everything was in place. Ethan did the same, making sure their team was ready. They had a small, hidden team of trusted people who had been tracking Vaughn's movements for weeks. The only way this would work was if they had eyes on every angle. By the time they were ready to leave, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting a dark shadow over the city. Ethan could feel his heart racing as he and Lauren stepped into the car. The baby was safely with a trusted family friend, and they were alone in this dangerous endeavor. The drive to the restaurant felt like an eternity. Los Angeles, with its glittering lights and bustling streets, felt distant, as if it were another world altogether. As they approached the meeting point, Ethan's mind raced. Every scenario played out in his head, every potential risk and outcome. Vaughn could be unpredictable, he might be armed, he might bring more of his men. Ethan had to be ready for anything. When they arrived, the parking lot was eerily quiet. The restaurant, an old Italian villa tucked away behind a maze of trees, stood dark and desolate under the streetlights. It looked like the kind of place where deals were made in secret, where shadows hid more than just the night. Lauren looked at Ethan, her face pale, but her eyes were filled with resolve. "Are we sure this is going to work?" Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It has to." Together, they walked toward the entrance, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth beneath them. Inside, the restaurant was dimly lit, the smell of old wood and forgotten memories hanging in the air. There was no sign of Vaughn yet. The place was empty, save for a few staff members who were just finishing up their shifts. They sat at a table in the corner where they had a clear view of the door. The plan was simple: wait for Vaughn to arrive, let him make his move, and then spring the trap. Ethan's mind was sharp, but his body was on edge. He couldn't help but glance at Lauren every now and then, wondering what she was thinking. He could see her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her eyes scanning the room. The minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching the tension further. Then finally the door opened. Vaughn stepped inside, his tall figure silhouetted against the streetlights outside. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he saw the man walk toward their table. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. Before going to the next chapter, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends. Vaughn walked into the dimly lit restaurant with the confident swagger of someone who had no idea that his world was about to unravel. Ethan watched him closely, his heart pounding in his chest. The man looked unchanged, as though the weeks of planning and anticipation had meant nothing. Vaughn's eyes flickered briefly in their direction, but he didn't seem to notice anything unusual. He made his way over to their table and sat down without a word, his eyes never leaving Lauren. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. For a moment, there was an unsettling silence. Ethan noticed Vaughn's usual arrogance, the way he carried himself like a man above it all, as though he controlled everything. It made Ethan's skin crawl. Lauren, though, was calm even as her gaze remained locked on the man. Her lips were pressed together in a thin line, but there was a determined fire in her eyes that Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. She was ready. Vaughn finally spoke, his voice smooth and cold. "I'm guessing this isn't just a social call. You wanted to meet, so here I am." Lauren's voice was steady as she replied, her words laced with the weight of everything they had been through. "I didn't want to meet you, Vaughn. But I had no choice. You left me no choice." Vaughn raised an eyebrow, an almost amused look flashing across his face. "Is that so? You think you can just throw threats at me and expect me to sit quietly?" Ethan could see that Vaughn was trying to control the conversation, but Lauren wasn't backing down. The moment was finally here and she was in full control, not Vaughn. "I've spent weeks putting everything together," Lauren continued, her voice unwavering. "I know about your deals, the dirty money, the lives you've ruined, and I know about the baby you left on my doorstep." The mention of the baby seemed to catch Vaughn off guard. His face flickered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "What are you talking about?" he said, trying to keep his voice calm, but there was a nervous edge creeping in. Ethan watched as Lauren pulled out a folder from her bag, placing it on the table between them. "This is everything. The evidence. Your financial dealings. The people you've hurt. And the real reason you left that baby at my door." For the first time, Vaughn's facade began to crack. His eyes darted to the folder, then back to Lauren, and the confident smirk faded into something far more sinister. "You think this will stop me? You think some papers will bring me down?" Lauren didn't flinch. "No, Vaughn. But they'll make sure you don't get away with it." She paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. "I'm not the only one you've hurt. There are others and they're ready to speak out. You're not untouchable anymore." Vaughn leaned back in his chair, his demeanor shifting. For the first time in the conversation he seemed unsure. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Ethan's heart raced. They were finally getting through to him. It was working. But they couldn't let up now. He had to push. Lauren's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it now. "I'm not afraid of you, Vaughn. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Vaughn looked at her for a long moment as if weighing his options. Then slowly he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You think this is over? You think I'm going to just walk away?" Before he could finish his sentence, Ethan's phone buzzed. His hand shook slightly as he looked down at the message on the screen. The police had arrived. The trap had been set and Vaughn had walked right into it. Ethan locked eyes with Lauren, a silent understanding passing between them. This was it. "Vaughn," Ethan said, his voice low, "you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and child endangerment. Everything you've done is about to come to light." Vaughn's face twisted into something unrecognizable as the reality of the situation set in. He stood up abruptly, but it was too late. The door to the restaurant swung open and two officers walked in. They moved quickly, flanking Vaughn before he could even react. "You're making a mistake," Vaughn spat, but his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. Lauren stood up, a look of triumph in her eyes. "No, Vaughn. This is your end." As the officers led Vaughn out of the restaurant, Ethan and Lauren shared a quiet moment, the weight of everything finally beginning to lift from their shoulders. The nightmare that had plagued them for weeks was over. They had taken down the man who had caused so much pain, and in doing so, they had not only protected their future but also ensured the safety of countless others. As they walked out into the cool night air, Lauren turned to Ethan, a soft smile on her face. "It's over," she said, her voice full of relief. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the past few weeks finally fall away. "Yeah, it is." If you've liked this story, please subscribe to our channel, like and share with friends.